Welcome to the Great Distraction.
Welcome back, everyone. This is The Great Distraction, and today the topic of discussion is shedding traditions to better humanity. My name is Ben. With me today are my co-hosts, Joe.
What's up?
Thomas.
Hey.
And Glenn.
Howdy.
If this is your first time listening, welcome. We thank you for joining us. The Great Distraction is a podcast that focuses on a vast and random range of topics, and we hope that each episode leaves you with, if nothing else, something to ponder. Today's topic, spread throughout the world, every era of humanity, every culture, every nationality, species, race, whatever. We all come from, and to some extent still abide by, traditions that have been passed down through our family, through our people, through our various cultures. This is something that affects and manifests itself everywhere and always has. And through these traditions that remain over time, many of them can actually act to the detriment of humanity as we continue moving through moving through time and modernizing ourselves and acclimating our various cultures and societies to the more I don't want to say forward in a necessarily positive manner, but where humanity is moving towards. So you have the first world countries are kind of leading all of these steps that we take and these changes and these modernizations for better or for worse. And we have all the rest of the places after that kind of following suit to some degree. I mean, they all put their own variants on the modernization that occurs among humanity. However, to varying degrees, all these varying types of people have different traditions that they want to hold on to. And whether they just be simple family traditions, or whether they be how they prepare their food, or how they dress, or ceremonial things like their union between two people, in the case of marriage or something along those lines, they go a lot deeper into government practices or keeping certain echelons of society structured the way they be, or keeping certain nationalities or certain genders down or up or in power, whether it be religious based too as well. That's definitely over time, forever since the dawn of humanity has been used to keep people in certain traditional mechanics and how they flow and deal with each other and progress and whatnot. So we thought, there's a lot of traditions out there that are hot topics today in this country, and ones that are hugely hot topics in other countries that many Americans are very passionate about and want to see changed or altogether removed or kept, one or the other, depending on what the other countries are doing. And we thought, man, that's got some interesting topic there. That's got some interesting stuff to discuss with regards to that. And Thomas actually had come up with this topic and thought, man, we should definitely discuss this kind of stuff. So we were reading a couple of different articles and trying to gather some more up-to-date stuff that was going on in the world with this. And one of the biggest hot points, I can't speak for everyone else in this country, but I know in California it's always a huge thing, is the LGBT community and their problems with issues that they're dealing with and trying to overcome with many of the old school traditional thoughts that exist everywhere and cause them a lot of heartache. And as the whole world kind of deals with this coming of acceptance within our societies, and specifically in this case the LGBT community, I think a better part of the world is dealing with this breaking away from these old traditional thoughts and to varying degrees the misuse of the concept of traditional ways of thinking and how they can be twisted to justify actions that ultimately end up taking away people's human rights, and not just in the LGBT community and in that type of living, but in many different types of living, be it for females, be it for people of different ethnic backgrounds within a country, just be it with religious belief systems. It affects everything, and it can be manipulated to one's will or a particular entity's will in many different ways.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to kind of what this topic got for me is, tradition to me has been a very plagued example of things for most of my life. Growing up in the Midwest, there's lots of traditions that were, even when I was young, I looked at these traditions as ways, they were tools of repression. Right. And that's how I looked at a lot of traditions. I mean, there's traditions that are like, hey, our family gets together, every Sunday before Christmas and goes to grandma's house.
Sure.
I can get with that. But there's also, traditions that go back to more like female genitalia, mutilation. There's a lot of things out there that are held as traditions by regimes and different cultures that are basically put there to repress people and control them, like you were saying, and a lot of it is women, children, and people of the gay and lesbian culture. So I really wanted to kind of bring this topic up because, in America, we have things as small as traditions that drive me crazy, is like the Christmas tree. Yeah. To me, that's a ridiculous one. But then it's also stem cell research. One of the things that keeps us moving forward as a culture is there's a lot of technology that we're not taking advantage of because of, and a lot of it's religious tradition. And all over the world, the one thing that seems to happen over and over again is a lot of these traditions that kind of control people and are, like I said, they're tools of repression, in my opinion, are based on tradition, just like a lot of the Middle Eastern ones. And there's a lot of countries in the Middle East where women can't have rights to inheritance from their parents. A family house would always go to the next in line man, not a woman in general, to just everything under the sun. And so in America, we're kind of blind to a lot of these, but a lot of the world, especially in the Middle East, some of these traditions are absolutely as chaotic as they can get, and they're very barbaric. Yeah. And I see a lot of these as being steps that we need to eradicate ourselves from a lot of these traditions to help move forward, not only technology, but for human rights in general. So that's kind of the basis of this conversation I wanted to kind of throw up with everybody.
Yeah, and it's interesting how they seem to shed. They kind of for example, one of the things that's really bugged me is I've always had a beef with here. In the Muslim community, the whole oppression of females in their societies. I've known a few people come from that background, and some of them come. I can only speak for the ones that come to this country that I've known, and they try to uphold some of those traditional standpoints as far as with respect to like really oppressing women, and it's always bugged me a lot. And a lot of the women who come here start to, they begin to realize shortly after they get here, hey, you don't have to live under that rule set anymore. That's not reality. That's not how it should be here. They start to experience something different, so their eyes start to open. Freedom. Yeah, this is ridiculous. Why am I living like this? And there's a funny thing about shedding traditions that are, I don't want to say right or wrong, but shedding traditions that are oppressive in that nature. People start shedding them. They don't want to necessarily shed a lot of the other things that go along with that. And I could be completely wrong, and if somebody writes in and instructs me otherwise, okay, I can change the angle of point of view. However, it has always seemed to me that the whole covering up with the headscarf, the face thing, the long clothing, how they tend to dress, how society tends to push females to dress in that community, is oppressive in my mind.
It's very it's a tool of control.
If you're going to push, if you come here as a female, as a Muslim female, and you're going to make the decision to try and shed the oppression that comes with that culture, shed all of it. Get rid of the clothes too. I mean, and now why I precluded that statement with maybe I am uneducated in that maybe it has religious background, religious implications. The reason they dress that way, maybe there's another reason that isn't oppressive, that they carry themselves like that and dress themselves, clad themselves that way. But to me, it seems like hide yourself. You're not worth being seen. That's how I always took it. And again, that could be completely wrong. So
and I think it almost goes back to we used to hear old men say, women should be seen and not heard.
See, and that's exactly,
and that's a tradition. That mindset is a tradition, and that's what I think. Moving forward, I'm a huge opponent for equal rights and women's rights. I grew up in a household where my mom worked, 12 to 15, 16 hours a day, because it was me, my mom, and my brother. I should say my mother, my brother, and I, to be proper. But, I watched... proper grammar. But I watched my mom struggle and work for, the whole time I was a kid.
Yeah.
And she'd come home sometimes and cry.
Yeah.
And it was just because of the pressure she took from dealing with guys harassing her at work.
Sure.
Her making a lot less money than the other guys at work.
Yeah.
And things like that. But throughout most cultures in America or in the world, there's a lot of that going on. I mean, like in Yemen, there's a big thing right now where there's no limit to the minimum age of marriage. So they marry. So someone can marry off. You can marry off one of your daughters who's 8 years old to a 40 or 50-year-old man.
And okay, so
and so they're basically raping these young girls, and that's how their culture brings them up. And I'm the last person to say your culture is good or bad, but I think in the human rights community, there's some problems going on here, and they're all based on traditions.
Sure, and many of the cultures that did that, because that was what you just described there, that really young marrying off thing, prepubescent
rape
girls. Yeah, that's spread in every country ever existed.
Absolutely.
That only stopped. I was looking into that one in particular, and age of consent, from what I read, was raised from the age of 10 for a majority of the states in this country in the 1920s. Yeah. So before that, marrying off an 8 or 10-year-old was a common practice. That was your tradition.
Yeah.
And that's a perfect example of traditions, of getting rid of some traditions to better humanity. You're selling off these young children who have no,
they have no say at all.
And they can't even formulate if you gave them the choice at that point. Yeah. Maybe at 16 you can pick, because the age of consent in many states in this country is still 16.
Yeah, in America.
In America, yeah. Again, that's not talking about the other countries or whatnot. But at least at 16, you can kind of make some decision for yourself. Kind of. But at 8 or 10, you absolutely cannot.
Absolutely
And you
not.
can't even understand or comprehend what's happening to you. At least at 16, you could tell that old guy is going to do what to me? Maybe I don't want that.
Yeah.
Or maybe I do. One or the other.
Yeah, but and that goes back to the tradition of arranged marriages as well, and that all kind of plays into that.
That is an arranged marriage. When you're 8 years old or 10 years old and you're handed off to that guy over there, that is an arranged marriage.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's people who are part of religions that take part in these traditions that might have another opinion or whatever. But from an outside perspective, and I myself am someone who has shed religion completely, or especially any organized religion, and the reason for that is because I feel, as my opinion, and I'm allowed to have it, that the world will never see freedom unless we abolish organized religion. Sure. And these traditions will go away with them, I hope.
But
it'll probably never happen.
Yeah, probably not in our lifetimes. It's going to move fast, and then it'll move in that direction and make bigger leaps and bounds in certain geographical areas.
Religions just make too much money, man.
Yeah. That's the thing. It really
and then
does.
having the tax write-off, so it's something else to stand behind. It's just...
Oh, yeah.
Dude,
it's still... Influence government policy.
I'm still blown away that our religious organizations are not taxed in this country. I can't believe that still stands in this day and age.
Right.
That just, make them turn over their books and make them pay buku taxes for free donated money. You make schools pay tax, educational establishments pay taxes. Why in the heck? That's as a topic for another
topic. But the same thing. The NFL doesn't pay taxes. So it gets pretty ridiculous in every direction.
Something else that they control.
Sports are a religion, man.
Pretty much, like in America. Well, in other countries too. Look at soccer.
Oh boy.
Soccer's a tradition that I think should be abolished.
yet another great distraction that is used to control the people, and they've been doing that since the day of the Romans with the Colosseum, and they've always done that. In fact, when politics can't get the sheeple to rally behind their personal enrichment goals, for themselves, they'll get them to rally behind the sports. They'll still follow you, and then they'll love you for providing it. So if you can't get them to like you for your political standpoints or your actions against or for the population, then you could get them to follow you because you brought sports to them.
Find something to distract them.
Right, and that was what Gladiator was all about. Right? That was the whole thing with Anyway.
Well, in America we see a lot of the religious right, and you see it especially now in politics. Well, it's always been in politics, but it seems like it's made a resurgence, especially since this last election, where everybody's going back to this, the Bible says this, and this is, so it's all based on tradition, but it's all control. It's all manipulating and contrling people for someone else's benefit.
When I was reading into the female genital mutilation stuff, the FGM, I'll call it from now on, because
it's hard to say that.
I don't even like saying it. It's some messed up stuff. But anyway, when I was reading more into that, the first thing that I read, without going into the details and specifics and mechanics of it, the first thing you read is that it's upheld by most of these cultures by the women that are within the culture. So it's the women that are forcing other girls to go through this. So the first thing I think is, well, why in the hell would the women want... Okay, so the next step, the next level of depth is that, okay, the first question is why? Why would the women want them to do this, right? One of the biggest reasons that... again, I'm not there, and I don't know how much these people are there and how good of study and research they did when they were there, but this makes but it does make logical sense to me. The first step is, well, they don't want their children, their female children, to be considered outcasts from society from what is normal. Horrendous as it may be, if everybody in the town is chopping off their right arm and you're the one walking around,
you better chop off your right arm.
You better get that right arm off, dude. You're nobody's gonna want to marry you. Nobody's gonna want to. You're an outcast from society. Okay, fine. The next question to really answer, or rather, I should say, to help one pass their own judgment on what is morally correct for themselves and as applied to this situation, is trying to figure out where these traditions started. And if you follow some of these back, for example, the FGM one, I was reading further and trying to follow it back. It was, from the reading I did, it began long, long ago as a gender inequality deal, wherein men wanted the women to be basically incapacitated to a certain degree. And so it started off with men controlling the situation. Then after so many years of tradition, the women bought into it. Now, all of a sudden, if you aren't like this, you're,
Well, as soon as the beginning of a fad or a behavior passes living memory,
it becomes a tradition.
But
I like to try and find out, if possible, where these things came from, because typically there's somebody who stood to benefit.
Almost always.
And when you find that out, you discover the roots. You discover the BS behind the BS. I mean, well, that makes complete sense. It's like and if you do that with especially things like organized religions, you can almost always trace it back through recorded history to individuals that were already powerful and stood to really gain financial gain, power gain, to create large groups of controlling forces from this support of this system and structure that they create and add to and whatever. And it's just like, man, that completely explains in a logical reason things that are often appear illogical up front.
Yeah, well, just like when Glenn was talking about this, we've talked about this before on the show about how no matter what you introduce into a society, if it goes long enough and another generation or a second generation comes in and it was always there, then they just don't question it.
Right.
So, is that how it becomes tradition?
That's how it is. That's the way things are done. When I was born, I came in, there was TV, You sit down, you watch it. It's there.
Yeah. You don't question it because it's always been there.
It's always been a part of my life.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't watch it anymore, but that was a conscious choice that I made a decade ago.
And in the tradition too, you go back and so a lot of traditions in the Middle East and in Africa. Look at like the African tribes that do this. They put the gold around their neck and they extend their neck. All those sorts of things. Those are all traditions.
Yeah.
The health hazards to these traditions are unfathomable.
Yeah.
And what they do is to a culture in the long run. And somebody could easily, who's a different religion or something, could look at me and say, "Oh, well, you're just a white American that you're making your 2 cents cry about it." But my standpoint on all of these things is more about the basic humanity of the farewell of human beings, mankind in general. And when you're repressing people over and over with these types of traditions, there's never really that freedom. Yeah, in America we have a lot of crazy freedoms that lead to a lot of stupidity, and violence is obviously one of those. But at the same time, I mean, genital manipulations and mutilations, and I mean, just these things are just. I feel like in the 21st century, it's amazing to me that we're still having conversations about this. I mean, how are generations going to look at us in the future? Because you look at things that were going on, and this is an example I use a lot. in LA, there's a thing called the Jurassic Museum of Technology. And the first time I went there, I didn't really understand what that was. And if you're in LA or going to visit LA anytime, you should look up the Jurassic Museum of Jurassic Technology. And so what it was, and it really shed a light on a lot of things to me, because at first I was like, well, what does that mean? I don't understand Jurassic technology. What does that mean? So,
the stuff that they used to make the dinosaurs come to life in Jurassic Park.
Well, things that used to make sense. And, you can go back as far as like folklore. At some point, folklore became almost like modern technology in certain points of human evolution, like throwing salt over your shoulder, or just all kinds of. And I don't know if you guys know what cat's cradles are. You guys know what a cat's cradle is?
I don't think so. No.
So a cat's cradle is this thing that people do, and they take a string and it's in a loop, and they weave it between their fingers.
Oh.
And they make these little patterns.
I've seen those. Yeah. I know
Well,
what they're called.
it kind of goes back to something Glenn and I were talking about not too long ago when it comes to like spells versus prayers.
Oh yeah.
And so the cat's cradle was this way of like you had these different. It was almost like a ceremony that you were doing by making these patterns, and you were trying to arrive at some sort of conclusion for something. So it was a way of like thinking or solving a problem or whatever, or even casting spells. And so a lot of these theories at one point, they seem crazy and chaotic to us, or Jurassic. At one point, those were believed to be modern thinking. And so when we look at some of those things like 500 years ago or even 100 years ago or something, there's a multitude of things we can look at and go, wow, I can't believe we thought that. I can't believe we thought asbestos was a good material to use for insulation.
Or lead for cups.
So, but all these things, so my conclusion to this statement is, when we look at things that are going on in the world today, there is a vast majority of things that fall into the realm of tradition that I believe at some point when we advance in our future are going to be seen as Jurassic technology.
Absolutely. And as a common foundation for that common ground there is, it's just pure ignorance.
Yeah, I mean, because
people are ignorant at different times. We're still ignorant. Like, imagine the things that we will know, that the humanity will know 300 years from now. We're like, what? And I've always thought cancer is going to be one of those things. Chemotherapy. Well,
chemotherapy is already starting to shed light. There's a lot of people starting to speak up about a lot of these things. And if you can't see, especially in America, if you can't sit back, if you've never had to fight with the medical world, and especially in the United States, Western culture, and seen the hypocrisy that surrounds the entire existence of it, you're obviously not paying attention. And a lot of these techniques, just like chemotherapy, I'm going to say it doesn't do anything.
Makes me think about like bloodletting. Back in the day, you went to a barber and you got your wrist slit, and you bled out for a bit, and then you sew your ass back up, and there you go.
That's Jurassic technology.
That is Jurassic.
Because at one point, that was modern medicine.
Yeah. And I think I've always thought that chemotherapy will go that route too. I mean, maybe it does help people. I don't know. Thankfully, I've never had to deal with it. However,
I haven't either, but I've had.
There will come a time when people are like, they did what to the? That's ridiculous. Why would you do that?
And the reason of why did they do that is always going to be because this industry made an extra $4 billion each decade off of that.
Yeah.
Wait, pharmaceutical what?
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
And when we're all like Star Trek. Yes. Okay, so that is definitely the gain of monetary gain is definitely one of the reasons why we're still dealing with these types of traditions that are obviously
useless and
retarded.
Horrible.
Yeah, one of the other reasons I was reading about here in one of these articles was maybe not in this culture, but probably in our country to a certain degree, but in third world countries or in different countries, blaming the ills of society on the non-traditional
or the minorities
makes it a real easy target. They are a real easy target. Yeah, it's a real easy scapegoat. So when people are upset and displeased and unhappy with the way their town, their city, their country, their state, whatever demographic you pick, they go to their leaders, be it political leaders, religious leaders, whatever. And I mean, imagine that.
Well, imagine it's obviously this group's fault. Yeah. So we should just put them in a camp and
exactly.
Maybe,
and imagine if you're
quarantine them.
Yeah. Imagine if you're one of those individuals, right? You've got 100,000 people looking to you for an answer, or maybe 10,000 people, hell, even 100 people in your town of 200, right? And what are you going to do? You got to come up with something. Otherwise, you won't be leader for very much longer, right? So it's real easy to scapegoat your way out and just say, hey, that's the problem over there. By the time they figure out whatever you did to those people, it didn't fix the problem.
It's 2 elections later.
It's too late. Yeah, exactly. You're you bought yourself the next 5-10 years, depending on what kind of war you start with these people, right?
Yeah.
And I think they've and that has been done many, many, many times within religious structured communities with the LGBT community. I mean, they have persecuted those people, in countries like mad. I mean, to the point of just
and
beating them
in
to
Russia,
death.
it's going on right now in Russia.
Oh yeah,
That's a big thing in Russia where
murdering people on the street.
Yeah, they run them down and stone them and chop them.
I didn't realize until recently. I have a friend who's from Jamaica, and we had a pretty long conversation, maybe about a year ago or something, and I didn't realize that Jamaica was a country that is very anti-LGBT gay community. I had no idea. So,
Wow.
But in the Jamaican culture, it's very, very forwardly pushed to be masculine, to be a man, and there are actually statues all over Jamaica that are basically fertility. They're the god, almost like they're gods of fertility god. And there are statues all over Jamaica where there's a man and a woman, or a man there, and basically his schlong is ginormous.
Yeah.
And usually hard, and it's culturally accepted because the fertility of the Jamaican man is considered such a hierarchy.
And who established that?
And
right?
who established that? A man
Jamaican
that wanted to
men.
be in control. But and that's a tradition.
That doesn't.
That's one of the countries where if you're gay or lesbian, you almost have to hide in the shadows to exist.
Yeah, and that doesn't surprise me either because they are Christian based.
Yeah.
And which I just recently read about with Rastafarianism, which I don't know if they're supposed to call it that or whatever, but like that whole like Bob Marley movement and all that is Christianity.
Yeah.
That they did nothing but, as a matter of fact, they said that they created their a variation on Christianity that because the Christianity that was presented to them, it came over there and they influenced them and whatever and converted them. That's the word I was looking for. They said that wasn't black enough, so they created a sublet of them, created a subculture, and that's what we know in reggae as Jah and Jaman and all that language that they made up all that stuff, and all it is following the regular old Bible. Jah is Jehovah, is Jesus, same thing. I mean, they just so all of that stuff is all Christian based, same Puritan stuff that we grew up with in this country. We grew up around in this country, and that would explain why the massive anti-gay movement. If you're Catholic or Christian, those people from the dawn of forever have banned those, even though many of their leaders and many anyway, we'll get into that. But that makes sense. So to Jamaica,
it does, it does. And you look at a lot of these things, the fundamentals of a lot of these traditions, based on how these areas of the world were originally explored and sort of conquered.
Yeah.
Whether it was a Catholic
conquistador or something else.
The
Spaniards went over there.
Whether it was the Spaniards came in, or the Catholic religion, or the Christian religion, set up the traditions that that are still implied today, and that's a lot of the direction. And like I said, tradition to me has always. Anytime someone says tradition, I immediately think of religion.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of it seems to stem from that.
Yeah, and as far as all the religion I've ever been exposed to in my life has been the most. I mean, just backwards ass thinking I can possibly think.
Illogical.
Illogical as can be. And what's funny is when I was kind of like reading a lot of random things online and talking about tradition and I just thought, I'll just spend a little bit of time researching a little bit of things about tradition and how people feel about tradition. And there's a lot of information online about everything. And I noticed what was crazy is there were a lot of things online that talked about tradition versus, should we move forward keeping traditions or abandon traditions? And it seemed like the overall view from everyone and all these different articles I ran into was about 60 to 70% of people outwardly said we should abandon tradition. And so I thought, well, okay, that's an opinion. What do you actually have to say about it? And so I started reading a lot of like individual comments about, in either direction. And it was funny because almost everyone who said we should abandon tradition had a logical explanation. Yeah. And everyone who said we should keep traditions just sounded like some right-wing Christian from Minnesota.
Yeah.
I mean, it was horrible.
I'm right-wing.
Right wing,
but you're not a Christian from Minnesota.
No, I'm not.
Typically, these things come together in a package. I guess I don't know.
I don't know. I've got a pretty conservative view on.
That's why we keep you around, Glenn.
Finances and
sure.
What
role our government
exactly. Yeah. What role our government needs to play in our lives.
But knowing you the way I know you, I can say this as loud as possible, and I think everyone will agree with me. You are definitely not a fan of the government.
No. The other thing too is the problem is not a person being one side or the other. The problem is when you have a collection of things that you can choose from, and they kind of go together, and you don't bother looking at or let me take a step back. Let me restart that. When you find somebody who's kind of a blend of things, you're a bit of this, you're a bit of that, and you kind of, your belief system kind of really combines the two together on the opposing sides. One thing I feel really strongly on the right side, one thing I feel really strongly on the left side, and back and forth, right?
People aren't one or another.
They're not, but some people are, and that's where you breed that strong.
I feel like somebody has a point that they feel really strongly about that identifies with a specific side, so they'll jump on that bandwagon to make one point, and the rest of the policies that they're wrapping up in that, well, whatever.
But some people will follow blindly whatever one side says because they think I'm a Republican and that's all I'm going to follow. So whatever my pastor tells me I should vote for and how I should think and how I should believe, that is ignorantly and
totally.
naively what I will follow. They don't even think any difference of it. That is what the pastor says. That is what my politician says. That is what my dad says. That is what my grandfather says. And those people...
but it's traditional to follow what my priest says.
That's where the tradition comes into play, is that people will follow based on traditional within their family, based on their society, whatever. And that's the problem. It's not because they're right-wing. It's not because they're left-wing. It's because they're being ignorant by ignoring completely the other side. They haven't even researched a lot of the stuff for themselves. They haven't experienced, they haven't gone away from their little cage, their little sphere that they're in, and they don't know any better. That's the problem, not one or the other. It's the lack of exposure to everything else.
Yeah. Misinformation
so basically they're not even making a decision for themselves. They're not thinking for themselves at all. They're just picking what they're told to do based on tradition.
Well, that's how all of our campaigns are run today. I mean, it's
well, that's what they want you to do. They want you to continue following that tradition.
Wow, look at this name that I've seen all over the place. This must be the name that I want.
Yeah. And I mean, in reality, they're both doing bad things.
Oh yeah.
I mean, come on.
Yeah, it's just whoever gets caught doing the bad things is the one that.
And sometimes,
but you know what? There's no such thing as bad publicity.
Yeah, that's it. And sometimes it doesn't even matter what bad thing they do. You know, I mean, they just all the money the Clintons stole, all the horrible things that Trump said or whatever. It doesn't matter. Sometimes the people like it, you know, and they go for it anyway. But
and well, another thing too is I think in that category, there's a lot of people that you can say the most retarded, and please don't take that word out of
context.
Out of context here. You can say the most ignorant thing possible, and there are people who will agree with you.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't matter what it is,
whatever it is.
And in that regard, I think that racism is a traditional
Big
part
time.
of culture, and in every culture, in American culture. I grew up in the Midwest, and honestly, up until probably 10, 15 years ago, it was sort of okay for a lot of people in a lot of parts of the United States, and still is, to say the N-word.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like sometimes I go back east to visit people, and I'm in the middle of northern Indiana, and I'm in some restaurant, and there's a bunch of hillbillies, telling everybody else in the restaurant how the world should be done, even though they're living off of, disability and everything else and getting food stamps, but they're going to tell everybody that they're real Americans.
Couch politicians.
Yeah, couch politicians. And they'll throw the N-word in like it's, the word thank you.
Yeah.
Every other sentence.
Yeah, that plays really into too. Like him or not, respect what he accomplished or not. However you feel, it doesn't matter. It took how long for a non-white, non-Southern based president of this country? I mean, you got to be kidding me, right? The country was physically built by the blacks and the Mexicans,
Chinese,
and the Chinese, and it took them this long to consider someone intelligent and respectable and capable enough to run the country. Well, they don't run anything really in my mind, but
be in that position.
To be in that position. I mean, are you kidding me? Why haven't we had one of every race at this point?
Because you got to look at really who's running the country.
Yeah.
I mean, you have entities that are supporting both sides of the campaign that their policies are going to push through regardless of who wins.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's the lobbyists. That's it. The corporations that are running the country.
Goldman Sachs, man, they're huge.
You guys heard recently? You guys heard about the? Well, not to date this podcast, so hopefully we air it soon. But they a couple days ago they approved the merger, $85 billion purchase of Time Warner. AT&T purchased Time Warner. You know what? That's a massive conglomerate that they just allowed to create. And then Trump overturned net neutrality. That's going to screw all of us with our internet service providers.
Wow.
And now AT&T is now the biggest corporation in the world now because of this merger that they just acquired all these ISPs, all these production companies, all this stuff that Time Warner owns, which is massive.
Do you remember? Does anybody remember what the name of the company was in RoboCop? Remember that made the robot, that made
man.
RoboCop, whatever they call it.
No, I was just gonna watch that movie too. It wasn't Cyberdyne Systems. That was Terminator. That was Terminator. Yeah.
But I mean, that kind of falls into
Skynet.
Skynet. But that falls into the same category. I think that at some point we are getting really close to that being a reality.
I think we're already there. They're just not acting on it enough yet.
They're just not being public about the control that they have.
I think they are in minor things, right? They're slowly easing us into this idea of monopolized control. The cell phones, for example. Now, Time Warner owns Verizon, so now AT&T owns Verizon. So now we only have one carrier. We have Sprint and T-Mobile, the only ones that have their own networks. That's it.
So it's monopolized.
It is. I mean, if they are allowed to acquire such a massive, so Sprint and AT&T are owned by the same company, like holy crap,
monopoly.
So what happens when they decide they're going to buy up T-Mobile? What's left? Sprint or buy up Sprint, because Sprint's been straggling along there for many years. T-Mobile,
well, that's the way to handle your competition. Just buy them.
Yeah, and that's exactly what those anti-monopolization clauses and laws are supposed to stop.
But there's probably a loophole in the merging of companies where. Obviously, again, it's
paying off the government.
Paying off the government. Somebody's lobbied for this or whatever. But there's always a loophole or something, and especially in finance and in any sort of big business, there's always loopholes that you've got a team of lawyers that you have on retainer.
That's all they do all day is look for ways to exploit it.
All they do all day is figure out a way to screw people over.
Yeah. And maybe today the modern traditions that are governing society are those that are being created by corporations, and they're the ones who have remanifested what tradition is and how it controls our societies. Yeah. Because no longer is it the religious organizations that are creating these traditions. No longer is it your clan or your tribe. Your tribe. No longer is it your tribe that's creating these things. We're not in such small units anymore. Now we need $500 billion, trillion-dollar companies. Whatever. I don't know how much now AT&T and Time Warner combined is worth now, but.
An unfathomable number, I'm sure. But and in the same regard, a lot of these corporations are becoming new religions. Look at Apple.
Yeah.
I mean, and as far as I'm concerned, most people who are Apple, I own a bunch of Apple products. I just because it's not because I'm like, it's the greatest thing ever. It just seems to work, and they're okay. I mean, whatever. I got to buy some sort of computer, so this is the one I ended up with, or the phone, or whatever. Yep. But that's not how a lot of people look at it. It's a religion.
It's not like Android or Google is any better. They're doing the same things, right? You're right. It is creating new tradition, new religion, and it's not hitting people in the traditional sense. So maybe we're not even seeing we're the frog in the boiling pot syndrome here. I mean, they're turning up the heat, and we're not even seeing it.
It's insane.
It's a lot to think about.
It's a lot to think about. But for me, like I said, going back to the tradition thing, I think what I see in America, and like I said, even to me, the pet peeve of the Christmas tree. The tradition of the Christmas tree. There's so many of these traditions
the Yule log.
To me, just what is that? What is that for? What is the representation of this?
I don't know, but along those lines,
it's a religious a reference that predates Christianity.
Yes, it does.
It's old enough that it doesn't really matter.
Most of Christianity's odd beliefs, things that they come up with, like Easter, the bunny, all that kind of stuff. Most of it's from the pagan days. Because all modern monotheistic religions come from polytheistic or pagan religions. They all do. They all just decided one day that they're going to not do this anymore, and we're going to start up with something else. It's like it's really weird.
Yeah, but the transition was more like with the pagan religions in control, and Christianity rises, and they started organizing their celebrations at around the same time of year as these existing ones, so they could slip below the radar.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They did that all through all the steps.
There's just a lot of traditions that are stupid. And going back to some of the Middle Eastern traditions, and I'm sure there's probably someone Middle Eastern listening to this that's just screaming at us right now. But whatever, it's our opinion. But there's a lot of things. I never pronounce this right, but I think it's pronounced bod. Do you know what bod is? It is the practice by which disputes are settled in a community by giving up a woman or girl as compensation for crimes.
So if you had 3 wives, you had to give up one of your wives?
Well, if you had a daughter and you got busted stealing,
you
gave up your kid.
Damn.
Because it's a daughter, so it doesn't mean anything. And the Chinese are a lot like this too. You look at, remember when the Chinese?
Traditional.
Well, there's the two kid max on the
Yeah.
Chinese.
Oh, when
Sure.
they were dumping girls
Girls?
on the side of
Yeah.
the road because they didn't want to
Yeah.
limit their.
And who has I heard about the pits too, where they throw the baby girls into the pits that they dig, and they leave it because because having a girl costs money when you marry her and all that. I thought that was like in India, or I don't know where the hell that was, where they were doing those. They
Yeah.
were finding those pits with all the baby skeletons of the girls that they were throwing down there.
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't looked into that. I didn't want to.
But that's what I mean.
Because
Like
those
these-
aren't really traditions. Those are subculture.
the bod is a
practice.
tradition.
Well, okay, I don't know about
That's
that one.
absolutely a tradition, and that's been going on for thousands of years. That's one of them that I kind of like. When I first ran into reading, that popped up a bunch in my research for different things, and I just thought, "Are you serious? That's like a trait. Like, oh, I've got this," and it goes back into the non-existence of minimal age for marriage in a lot of these cultures, especially the Iraq cultures and that part of the Middle East. So I stole something, and now it's a dispute in the community. Okay, well, I'll appease the person that's accusing me of this. Here, you can have my 7-year-old daughter.
Yeah.
I mean,
Nice.
well, I mean, how is there not like a bazillion, human rights organizations jumping all over some of these things? And I'm sure they are at some point, but at the same time, you're crossing boundaries of like, now you've got a political standpoint because this is a different country, this is a different culture, it's different traditions. And as we know, the Western culture can't just go in and tell everybody what to do, just like Eastern culture can't go in and tell everybody what to do. And that's the biggest fight I've ever seen is Christians versus, Muslims and everybody else. They all have their own opinion, and a lot of these are based on these traditions. But again, all these traditions, in my opinion, are holding us back from advancing as a culture that can give ourselves healthy advantages like stem cell research.
Yeah, let me try and bring it back full circle to kind of one of the points I started with this, going back to the Muslim community and the women covering themselves up. You can, and I'm going to try and tie this into our lighter traditions, things like the Christmas tree. A lot of these traditions get sold to us as very simple, harmless things, and I mean, yeah, for the most
Very
part,
pure.
Well, but going in that direction, yes. Very simple, very harmless things. I mean, what's the trouble with letting your kids run around and collect Easter eggs, even if you're not religious and they're not religious? What's the trouble with having a Christmas tree and the gifts and having it on this particular day and yada yada yada? And those instances, as they stand, are not particularly harmless. I mean, they don't do anything, right? I mean, I grew up
not particularly harmful.
Harmful. That's what I'm sorry. Yeah, no, thank you. I grew up doing those things too in a non-religious family, and I had no idea until I was like, maybe in college when I bothered to look it up, what Easter even meant. I didn't know why we were even celebrating Easter.
Well, we're just celebrating a giant rabbit that lays eggs.
Exactly, that lays eggs. So as far as I was concerned, that's all I had ever heard until I was, in my early 20s or something like that. But part of the problem with accepting and allowing those traditions to continue is that it does, in a sense, and at least in my opinion, and maybe it isn't, maybe it is, but in the psychology behind it, it kind of breeds, in my opinion, a sense of desensitization and allowing these traditions to continue, which are part of a bigger thing. Going back to the Muslim women covering themselves up, maybe they like to dress like that. Maybe they're comfortable with it. Maybe they've been doing it their whole lives, so to them it's normal. But if they continue doing it, it opens the door to continuing the larger traditions to kind of resurge themselves again. So it's almost like I feel like you can't wipe out the bad part of the tradition or the morally or the human rights blocking parts of the tradition if you're still willing to accept and allow the smaller parts of those traditions.
Well, but there are other aspects to this. Family gatherings, man, or excuses to visit family, or I mean, with a lot of like Easter or Christmas or these other religions, they tend to follow like solstice or different equinoxes.
Okay, so but let me tie it to you this way. Let me present it to you this way then. Father's Day. Okay, why do I need a day? When I say
it's an excuse to celebrate.
It's an excuse to spend money. It's an excuse to celebrate. Sure, and it drives economy.
Spending money is that's more of a recent adaptation.
It is. That's true. That's one of the things they've manifested with this ability.
Right.
But
so that's how it's changed. But
we made it possible for them though by allowing these traditions to continue.
But celebration as a society is really, really important for our own psyche.
That's true.
You have to have some way of having
unification. Bringing people together.
Bringing people together to celebrate, to let loose, to break up the monotony of every day. When you have
That's true.
Governments, if they try to eliminate religions, there are revolts.
Oh yeah.
You embrace a religion, or not a religion, but a celebration, and you can move things through as long as you don't inhibit the people from enjoying their life.
Yeah.
So a lot of these traditions border these celebrations, and there's nothing wrong with having these celebrations. They're important. Family, society, meet and mingle. Turn off your fucking phone.
Yeah.
You want me to turn off my phone?
Oh, not you.
Please silence your phone.
I was trying to check my Instagram.
Is that where you went for a minute?
My point was...
No, and you bring that is a valid point, and like I said, that thought was kind of off the top of my head there. But I always worry that does small things lead to bigger things, and if you desensitize, and desensitization is always something I'm thinking about, is how do we get to where we are now? That some things in life I'm like, how in the hell are people still okay with this? Well, it's a series of desensitizing steps, not unlike government passing laws that slowly take away our rights, right? It's again the frog in the boiling pot syndrome. You know, it's like little by little. Next thing you know, oh,
sure,
you can't have no guns, period, or whatever. You know,
yeah,
whatever the desensitization they're using is.
I'm with you there, and yeah, with some of the celebratory traditions, the religious elements that go along with a lot of them don't need to exist. I agree with you on that end.
Yeah,
but the celebration itself, the games you play, the maypole.
Yeah, and that's why we.
That's
still, and that's why a lot of people who are non-religious still do that stuff.
Exactly,
because of the childhood memories or whatever.
I mean, the closest thing I am to any religion is Pastafarian.
Yes,
Pastafarian.
Oh yes,
flying spaghetti monster, man. You do not know of Pastafarianism?
I've heard that before, but
it's been around for a long time.
For any of you who are curious, look up the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster.
Yeah, Pastafarianism wiki. Just Google that.
It is stemmed from a letter to a school board.
Yeah. It's real.
It is.
It is real.
It is legit.
It's just as real as Christianity.
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Cool
But
stuff.
for me, I think with traditions, and you know, those traditions are great. Just like birthday. A birthday is a tradition.
Yeah, absolutely.
Celebrating your birthday.
That's true.
And there are lots of them. And there's always that argument of like, well, if we don't have traditions, we don't remember our past. We don't. But a lot of these traditions are holding on to a past that really should be forgotten.
That's kind of my angle.
And that's the one thing I was trying to bring up too. And also, traditions should not be out of step with international human rights. That's the part that really bugs me about a lot of traditions. And we talked about a lot of these Middle Eastern cultures and stuff, and some of these traditions. We're not as bad about it in the Midwest because in the Western culture, because so many people have rallied and stood up and fought the battle to get rights, like the LGBT community. You know, but in Russia,
at
you
the
can't
same
do that.
time, where I'm on board with you on these points. Where is it my job or if somebody disagrees with a tradition or a way that I behave with my peers, what right does this other person have to tell me that I'm doing it wrong?
No, nobody's trying to impose any new traditions or
right. No, but to try to eliminate a tradition. I mean, even if I'm not on board with that. Giving off a daughter for
minimum age in the marriage thing.
Yeah. That's.
Yeah. And to me, I'm more speaking about the extreme traditions like that.
Sure, and I understand your point there, and but at the same time, I feel like that's an overstep for us to step in and try to stop it.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, and we can begin that questioning with who the heck are we to even say what is right or wrong with anybody's traditions. So you're absolutely right. I mean, just because we think it's wrong to slice up female genitalia doesn't mean that it's actually right or wrong.
I would not allow it to go on in my presence.
Sure. No.
However,
but that's because we're based on a different moral and ethical mindset.
Right. So what seems wrong to me does not seem wrong to these other people.
Yeah. But that's judging right or wrong.
Which is totally subjective.
Exactly.
I
think in this topic, we were trying to maintain the topic around the betterment of humanity. So, be it right or wrong, betterment
is a subjective term.
Yeah, well, okay. Maybe we should say advancement.
I think that argument sort of falls short when it comes to religious oppression. I know one of the first disconnects I had with religion was when I learned in science class about Galileo, and he first put forth the idea that the Earth revolves around the sun. Up until that point, the Catholic Church said that the sun revolved around the Earth, and he was charged for heresy for saying that. So that was a prime example of how religion, the Catholic Church, impeded the betterment of society. It impeded the advancements of science.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when it steps on education or furthering our understanding of our existence,
The advancement of humanity.
Advancement through technology. And that's why I always bring up the stem cell research thing, because in
that's a good one.
America, I think it's a very good example in the Western culture that, and it's, to me, it's all based on religious views and the traditions of religious views that we can't move forward with stem cell research, where most of the free world is already doing that. And to me, that's one of the things where I see the disconnect of traditions where we should abolish certain types of traditions that are stopping us from being healthy, to having really solid human rights in general, to not saying, oh, well, you're different than this other person, or you're gay, so we can't give you anything, or you're a woman, so you can't own property, like,
or you don't make enough money to be in this echelon
or to be
of society,
cool, whatever. That sort of traditional thinking. That's the one that I think really hurts us as a culture. And I know it sounds really stupid, but I oftentimes when I think about this topic, I remember episodes of Futurama. And the reason I say it is because there's lots of times randomly thrown into Futurama where, if you're paying attention, they'll talk about how the society abandoned something. And religion is one of those. And they don't bring it up a lot, but if you ever really watch the show,
Star Trek,
there's no religion. And in the future, where people have a bigger understanding of being a one, a more, we're all together, we're one thing. A lot of those traditions had to be abandoned to move forward.
the natural thing would be
that.
to eliminate things that cause segregation, and religion
Absolutely.
is definitely one of those things that causes segregation.
also sports teams.
And sports teams, yeah.
Absolutely, and political,
Political
all
parties.
many of the great distractions promote segregating our people.
Right.
But
divide and conquer.
But Joe, when you were bringing up the thing about Galileo, for a very long period of time, anybody who had any sort of belief that was against the church was absolutely persecuted. They were stoned to death. They were
excommunicated.
Yeah.
And that held such power because once that person's excommunicated, they have no contact with their friends, with their family, where they live.
Yeah.
There was so much control instituted.
And they were outcast from everything. So
Right.
so not only was their new thought that they were trying to bring people as a newfound knowledge that they had actual proof from, they had studied, like Galileo had proof. He had spent a lot of time studying this, and he had pages and pages of examples. And I remember seeing a documentary that talked about that era where, they were just like, you're saying something against the church, we don't care what it is, put that guy in a cage.
Because that undermined their control of
Absolutely.
their people.
And to me, that's what, when I talk about traditions, that's the part about tradition that really kind of irks me and really kind of throws me into this mode of like the conversation of it. And I agree, there's lots of traditions, especially in other cultures, that are amazing, healthy traditions. And I'm not saying that all traditions should be abandoned, but I think that there's a lot of them that are used as tools of manipulation.
Absolutely.
And I think that as we move forward as a culture on this earth, we are going to have to examine ourselves from a more inside look at, like, okay, so Christianity is this, Muslim is this, whatever. We can't keep doing these things that are just mutilating people, destroying the possibility of science helping cure cancer and all these things because of some religious standpoint. And that's what I see in the Western culture all the time. And again, I keep, I'm sorry if I keep throwing up the stem cell thing, but it's amazing to me how many ridiculous religious people in the United States have stood up and screamed and yelled about stem cell research. It's unbelievable, especially if you know anything about stem cell research in any of the other countries in the world.
Yeah. And if we had a different religion in this country be more dominant, for example, Jehovah's Witness, I know they won't allow blood transfusions, right? I mean, can you imagine how many people and how much research wouldn't have been done because you couldn't play with blood? You couldn't do any research with blood. I mean, what in the heck?
That's like the uses of CBDs and marijuana now.
The same, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I was going to first go with, but then I couldn't really think that I've ever heard any religious ties or any religion taking an anti-marijuana stance.
Yeah.
publicly anyway. I mean, I'm sure that they tell their congregations, this stuff is, they'll make you crazy.
Well,
and all that
there
stuff.
might be that clause that keeps falling into their own Bible about all the fruit-bearing trees and plants of the earth that are.
Yeah, they open to misinterpretation, and they can just say, "Oh, I don't know, that's included in that fruit. Don't do that. It comes from a tree. Don't do that." Yeah.
So I guess a good point to make here is to think about when you're making a decision or trying to form an opinion, or there's something that comes up, think about why you are in favor of that or why you are opposed to it.
That's right.
And does it come from a tradition, or have you actually put thought and research into something?
Do your research and question everything.
Question everything.
Yes. Never take anything as, what do they say, gospel? You like that? Yeah. You like that.
According to Rick and Morty, is it granted or granite?
Yeah, yes. On a Rick and Morty quote, we are heading out. All right, everyone. Thank you very much for listening. And until next time, question the traditional mindsets. Show notes and other info can be found at our website, greatdistraction.com. The Great Distraction is listed in iTunes, and we greatly appreciate it when our listeners take the time to look us up and leave us a 5-star rating and review. That helps our show grow and motivates us to continue producing content. If you'd like to get in contact with us, you can do so using the email address, greatdistractionpodcast@gmail.com, or via our website. We're always interested in hearing any thoughts, comments, or questions from our listeners. Keeping up on the latest from us can be done in several different ways. You can add us to your favorite RSS feed tracker. The link is available on our website or in iTunes. Or you can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Just search for Great Distraction, one word, no space. As always, thank you for listening, and thank you for all the support.